Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a good year for British apples, but who's planting the orchards of the future?
The renewal of orchards has slowed down. This is a warning, and it is very important that we give growers the confidence to invest.
More on that later. Let's start, though, with politics. And as it's party conference season, we're hearing from all the parties about their plans for the countryside. Today, the Liberal Democrats continue their conference in Bournemouth. Later this morning, they'll be discussing how, to use their words, rural communities have been let down by a lack of access to local public services, decent public transport, affordable housing. And also how, to quote them again, family farmers have been undermined by both Conservative and Labour governments. I asked Tim Farron, the Lib Dem spokesman for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, what his party's priorities were.
It's about making sure that the UK finally has, for the first time in generations, a proper food strategy, a strategy for establishing food security. It's making sure we value our farmers, making sure they are our first thought, not our last thought when we do trade deals, making sure that the farm payment schemes that we have are applicable and available to all farmers, not just the wealthy few and those who are landowners and aren't farmers at all. And indeed, of course, scrapping the appalling family farm tax, which is already causing enormous anxiety, making sure we tackle excessive second home ownership, good access to local health services, vibrant local towns and villages, making sure that homes are affordable for people to live in, that local schools are protected, that there's public transport that gets people where they need to go to. In other words, a whole plan for making rural Britain at the heart of our economic recovery and not an afterthought.
Where is the money going to come from? Because it's going to be expensive.
So the Liberal Democrats had a costed manifesto, which would have included £1 billion added extra to the farm payments budgets across the United Kingdom. That money would have come from a small slice, a relatively small slice, of undoing the tax breaks that were given to the high street banks by the last Conservative government. So that's where the money would come from. The most important thing is what it would achieve. And my great concern about the current situation with regard to the post-Brexit farm payments is that we now have, for the first time since the Second World War, no comprehensive farm payment package for farmers to get into. What I mean by that is that the schemes that do exist are open for brief windows and then closed, and accessible only really to the first comers.
I just want to talk very briefly about inheritance tax on farms. You say that you would scrap that measure, which comes in April and which this government says is fair. How would you afford to scrap it, and why would you scrap it? Because many will argue it's perfectly fair.
So I think once you look into the detail, it clearly isn't perfectly fair. We now know, University of Cumbria figures show that at the end of the transition, in just a few months' time, really, the average upland farm income will be just over half the national minimum wage. Now, many of those farmers will be sitting on farms that might be worth, let's say, £3 million on paper, despite earning, £15,000 a year. A quick calculation tells me that that would probably mean that £20,000 a year in inheritance tax would need to be paid by the family after the death of the previous farmer. £20,000 a year when you're only earning £15,000. My math isn't brilliant, but I can tell you that isn't doable. And so what happens? Those farms fold. Those farms will be bought up by large corporations, private equity outfits doing bogus offsetting, and that's where we are going. Now, of course, the reality is the government tells us, given a 7-year period, people can plan and avoid it. So the government's own answer in all this is that people don't need to pay the tax, but they're not looking at the reality of how people live and exist. And we're talking about whether there might be a cost to us not doing this. And the reality is there's a cost to us doing it. The obvious message from everybody is that investment in the industry is drying up, and the inheritance tax changes are the major cause of it. All the other ancillary industries are losing revenue significantly because farmers are terrified because of what's coming with the changes potentially from the 1st of April next year. In other words, Rachel Reeves' move is massively counterproductive, even from an exchequer point of view.
Tim Farron from the Lib Dems. An experimental scheme using drones to disperse native tree seeds across areas of rocky moorland in the Scottish Highlands has produced encouraging results. The project, funded by the University of Edinburgh, seeded 3 hectares on the remote Du Alt estate on the Moidart Peninsula west of Fort William. 1 year on, and owner Ed Townley says it has been a success. Kathleen Carraher met Ed on his estate to find out more about the trial.
We definitely need a more efficient way of woodland creation. We're failing to meet government targets of woodland creation year on year, and this kind of approach, which finds kind of the harmony between the two kind of standard methods at the minute, which are conventional planting of saplings and natural regen. Conventional planting being expensive, and natural regen taking a very long time. This kind of finds a balance between the two. It's much cheaper than conventional planting, and it's much faster than natural regeneration alone.
You have some video of the drone taking off. How did it load and disperse the seeds?
We arrived with the drone on the back of a quad bike at each of the 3 hectare sites. We mixed all the seed together, mixed it with a carrier, which we had sawdust, and that just creates the right level of kind of dispersal. So we loaded that into the hopper and the drone takes off. It's got its flight path all set into itself, and it was going forwards and backwards in strips along the hectare. It was amazing seeing the seed come out, and then it was just a waiting game really over the next couple of months to see if anything happened. And then we started seeing some sort of shoots of green that were a kind of different shade of green to everything else around, and took a deeper look and we're like, I think that's them.
So that was a great moment.
That was a huge moment, yeah. Just come across the Scots pine there that I can see.
Let me see. That is tiny.
Yeah, so that's had one and a half growing seasons. They're tricky to come across, but once you get your eye in, you do start to see them popping up everywhere. There's a little round there. So we did a survey a couple of months ago where we came out and counted what came up in 1 square metre plots, and we've come out with a 2.7% germination rate, which was higher than we expected.
2.7 seems a fairly small number.
Yeah, 2.7 is small, but they put a lot of effort into creating thousands and millions of seed, sort of per tree. They're really, really fine seed, and a lot of them naturally won't survive. So 2.7% was really successful for us. I mean, it's great technology. It really has kind of opened up this kind of new avenue, and I see big potential in it.
We know there's a lot of wild deer on these hills. Will they not be over here to graze these little tiny shoots?
With the theory that we have is that these saplings, having rooted in this place rather than being planted out on the hill, by the time they get to kind of deer grazing height, they'll be a lot more resilient. This is such a vast area all at once that we think it might be enough to kind of overwhelm the deer and work without fencing. We'll have to fence some areas and leave some areas open to really see that difference.
Ed Townley there. It is a good year for British apples. A lack of frost and the abundance of warm weather should mean a bumper crop. This week we are focusing on top fruit, the rather clunky name for apples, pears and plums, fruit grown on trees. Later in the week we'll talk plums and damsons, but today it's apples and pears. Harvest is underway and hopes are high, but there are continuing concerns about the loss of orchards and growers' reluctance to invest in new ones. Ali Kappa is Executive Chair of the grower group British Apples and Pears.
Farmers and growers have faced huge amounts of inflation over the last 4 or 5 years as a result of the world waking up after COVID and the Ukraine war. And whilst the returns back to the farmers from supermarkets, they have improved this year and last year, we haven't really caught up. As far as I can see, when I walk into supermarkets, the price of apples have not increased that much to the shopper.
Every year, listeners highlight the number of imported apples on supermarket shelves, even at times of year when British are available. Has that situation improved over the years?
Over the last 15 to 20 years, British apple and pear growers have been growing on the same land area, about 5,500 hectares. That hasn't changed much over that period. What has changed is we've doubled production in that period. And what does that mean? It does mean that there are less imports than there were. I think one of the complaints I get from customers is I can't find British. And often that doesn't mean that the British fruit isn't there. It just hasn't got a big enough Union Jack on it.
It's interesting you say there that the same amount of land is being used over 2 decades, because we've spoken before about the loss of orchards and the challenges for growers in planting a new one. But actually, it seems it's sort of stable.
So the land area that has orcharding in the mix is stable, but the replenishment of those orchards, which is really important to keep this continuity of fruit production up, the renewal of orchards has slowed down. And that's as a direct consequence of inflation and lower returns. So when I speak to the supermarkets right now, I am saying this is a warning knell. The bell is sounding, and it is very important that we give growers the confidence to ramp up the renewal of orchards again and for them to invest. And they need to invest in the orchard infrastructure, but they also need to invest in storage and packing infrastructure. And all of that is millions, tens of millions of pounds.
And there are challenges, aren't there? There's talk, for instance, about changing the rules around seasonal workers so that employers would pay the costs of visas and flights. The argument being that those workers are coming from further and further away, so it's a reasonable way of protecting them financially. What impact might that have if it went ahead on fruit businesses?
We are the only country in the world that is discussing this. So all those countries that we're competing with, imported apples coming from all other parts of the world, this is not being discussed. So it would make us very uncompetitive with those imports. It will add 5 pence to each pack of gala apples. So the cost is very significant.
Ali Kappa. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton.